welcome everybody to the SoxProspects.com podcast, the web's number one source for information on the Boston Red Sox from top to bottom, from Fort Myers to Worcester, across the Pike to Fenway, and all stops in between. Thank you all for listening. My name is Chris Hatfield. I am the executive editor of SoxProspects.com, and I am joined, as always, by our director of scouting, Ian Kundle. Ian, not scouting right now, probably would be more scouting for front office talent based on the news cycle than on-field talent. Not a ton to talk about on field where, the AFL is about 2 weeks in, a little over 2 weeks in. We've got international winter leagues starting up. Mexico has started and no one's there for the Red Sox, but this week we're going to get the Dominican and Venezuela going. But right now it's really all about the GM. We're going to be careful here. It's not the GM search. It's the head of baseball ops search. Kind of a weird news cycle. I'm trying to focus on, waiting till there's actual news, but I think we're starting to get that trickling in while there's some playoff baseball going on. So kind of always a weird point in the calendar to do a podcast, but here we are.
I honestly thought we were just going to talk about the Pan Am games today and Randy Consuegra, but I mean, we can also talk about the GM /
Randy
baseball operations.
Consuegra, the legend.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like I honestly thought that's what we were going to talk about. But it started off with nothing. It was just, hey, people don't want to interview for the job, was basically all we heard for the first week. And then,
not even the first week, because it was like,
it was the
first week after the season, because during the season, no one reported anything, even though they were already starting the process.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, it seems like yesterday, the dam kind of broke when Chad Jennings dropped his first article on it. And I think him, Chris Cotillo, Sean McAdam, Alex Spear, like the beat writers have been since the dam finally broke. I feel like they've all been on their A game, just dropping knowledge left and right of what they're hearing. And we went from like no candidates to now we have,
it was like the other direction where Alex had the article that's literally like, here are all of the people.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Because that's all you could do. Like, it's like, here's literally every VP or above person in the Red Sox front office. And here's a bunch of people from outside who may or may not get interviewed.
And now I feel like it seems like it's kind of getting narrowed down a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of go over what we
will. We got to do the preliminaries. So we want to thank you all for listening. You can support the show a few ways, spread the word, tell someone when you're interviewing them for your director of baseball operations job about the podcast. Front office people, tell whoever you hire about us. Cause that was cool when we got the last guy on. So we want to get the next guy on too. You can also rate and review us on iTunes, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is that you listen. And you can support us on patreon.com/SoxProspects. Finally, you can send your emails to podcast@SoxProspects.com because we want to talk about what you all want to hear about. And so we're going to get right into the news, Ian. The Red Sox have interviewed, by my count, of course, I closed that note. Okay. By my count, there have been 6 confirmed interviewees for reportedly, with a couple other names being bandied about as potential candidates. We know who isn't being considered or who have pulled their names out of the running potentially. We know who has been interviewed, and there's kind of this maybe category. Let's start with who has interviewed. 3 internal candidates. 1, Eddie Romero, not a surprise. A VP and I think he's not a senior VP. I think he's like executive VP and assistant general manager. Paul Taboni, who is a VP of scouting and player development, and Mike Groupman, who I think is a senior VP of baseball operations. Or no. There's a senior VP of baseball operations. There's a senior VP assistant GM. I think he's the latter because I think Crockett is the senior VP of baseball ops. So Groupman is senior VP / assistant GM. Those 3 have interviewed. Listing with them, kind of the 4th person you would expect in that group is Raquel Ferreira. She apparently withdrew her name from consideration for family reasons. Apparently had a long talk with Sam Kennedy, and she said it was just not a good time for her and her family to do that. So those are 3 internal candidates. I guess before we move on to the external candidates, Ian, I think we said on the first time we talked about this, Ian, if you kind of made me commit to someone initially at who would be getting that head of baseball operations job. I would have guessed Eddie just on the, I knew he was going to be, you knew he was going to be a candidate and a strong one, based on the fact that he's, been trying to move up, and that's really the only way up at this point. I would be very surprised if Romero is it not at least offered the GM position. I don't know how you feel. I guess it depends on who they bring in. Like if they bring in someone from the outside, I could see them saying, and we would like Eddie Romero to be. I mean, heck, they're telling the person coming in, if someone's coming in from outside, that their entire front office, more or less. It would not surprise me to see him become the GM if he doesn't get the head job.
I think that in turn, whoever, I'm not sure who's going to end up being the whatever they're going to call the title now.
Head of baseball ops.
They're not going to do CBO again, I would assume.
No.
But I would assume that whoever becomes the quote unquote GM is going to be someone internally, like Eddie, Paul Taboni, someone like that.
Depends, right? Like I could see if you're going to elevate there. I could see the argument if you're going to elevate an Eddie. I don't think it's what they're going to do, but I could see the we want to bring someone else in though to be under you who maybe brings some different experience, who
from outside the org
fills a hole that you have in your game, right? Yeah. It's kind of like the bringing in an experienced bench coach type situation. Mm-hmm. That said, I do think it's different, and I don't think they're going to do that for reasons we've discussed, because it's like you discussed, it's like the GM is the 40-man roster protecting a guy from Rule 5 of the lieutenants. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's kind of how it feels.
It's the new way to stop people from getting poached from your organization. Is just give them good titles. But obviously they're also earned. Like the reason you're putting someone in that role is you think they can do a very good job and they're highly qualified. But I think it's hard to say, and I feel like that's a conversation that'll probably be better had once we know who the new head of baseball operations is.
Sure.
But I think the Red Sox have some very strong internal candidates, and it's not a surprise to see them getting a crack at it.
Groupman's like the analytics senior VP, more or less.
His official title is assistant general manager, but I think you're right.
It's senior VP and assistant general manager.
Oh, is it? Okay. Yep. I was looking at Alex's article
because Eddie and Raquel, Eddie Romero and Raquel Ferreira are, I think, executive VP and assistant GM. BOH, after losing the GM job, is executive VP of baseball operations. Because I was looking at this the other day trying to explain to folks on the forum what it all means. And then Taboni is interesting because he got elevated to VP a lot quicker than guys usually get elevated to that level of position. When you consider that, the number of years that Mike Rickard was with the team before he got there, the number of years that Ben Crockett was with the team before he got there, it does seem like they really like Taboni.
He's only been with the team. He's only been with the team since 2015, whereas almost all these other guys are Eddie's 2006. Mike Rickard, we mentioned, is 2004. Gus Guadalbama was another one was mentioned, was 2006. Granted, that's with a couple of different teams. It wasn't just the Red Sox. He's been with the Red Sox since 2006. Brian O'Halloran was 2002. Mike Grootman's the other one who's recent. He came over in 2021.
Yeah, but he came in at that executive VP or senior VP level.
Correct, because he was VP of international scouting with the Brewers and the Royals baseball operations and analytics team before that. So he's got kind of that wide range,
diverse background. Yeah. So he's not just analytics. Sorry, I should.
He was big on the international market too.
Yeah. And so but these are guys that when they move up, everybody connects Eddie Romero to the international program. That's not all he's doing now. They have international program directors. Eddie's still heavily involved in that because that's his background where he came up with. But when you're at that VP level, you are doing more, right? You're not just the farm director. You're not just the scouting director. It's interesting that they're giving Taboni a look. Taboni feels more to me like a GM candidate than a head of baseball ops candidate, just based on experience. But it's not terribly surprising that he's getting a look. Outside folks who have been interviewed include Neil Huntington, former head of the Pirates front office, local. He's from Massachusetts or New Hampshire.
We're doing the people who've interviewed, right?
Who have interviewed, have interviewed. Yes.
Or it's been confirmed by some of the
reported that
we mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Huntington, local guy, went to that same Amherst sports management program that like Ben Charrington went to. And there's one more guy. Why can I not think of it? There's one more local guy who was in it who was a GM.
Who interviewed?
No, no,
Oh,
who was in that
oh,
Amherst
wasn't it Chris the guy? No,
Antonetti?
yeah, was it Chris
I
Antonetti?
think it's Antonetti. Yeah,
I thought that's. I think I'm not
I
100
think
percent
that's right.
sure, but I
Maybe
think
not. That
yeah.
sounds right. No, that sounds right. But yeah, Huntington, who I think he hasn't had a head job since he left the Pirates. Um, Thad Levine, who's the number 2 guy in Minnesota, has interviewed. And the interesting one was Craig Breslow, the only interviewee who has a Sox prospects player page. Um,
That one's really interesting
it's
because he was
yeah,
connected with the Red Sox to run their pitching department
yeah,
by
by Pete Gammons.
Peter Gammons.
Peter Gammons, yeah,
And he's seen as one of the rising stars, obviously, in the industry. And it'd be a pretty big jump from, I mean, he was the assistant GM and director of pitching. To jump straight to head of baseball operations would be
it
pretty big.
depends what they had him doing, right?
But
Like,
but I also think I look at the Red Sox and with how much experience they have already there, and obviously remaining in the front office, I do think you can kind of take a chance on someone who, like Breslow, potentially, who's maybe doesn't have that experience running a team fully because there's going to be so many, highly qualified lieutenants already there.
yeah, yeah. I mean, he does strike me almost maybe as more of a GM candidate than a head of baseball ops candidate, but like, I could see
But
it.
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, he also lives in. I didn't realize this. He
he
still
lives in
lives in
Newton.
Newton. Yeah, so he
Yeah,
still lives like in the area. And
yeah,
the other thing that I thought was interesting that Alex mentioned is he's never been based out of Chicago while working for the Cubs. So like
yeah,
he's not going to have any experience with the day to day lifestyle of being in the front office and kind of because it's a very different vibe to what a lot of the front office positions are when you're going into the office at the stadium every day
yeah.
and
Oh
and
yeah,
working out of there versus the guys because like a lot of the other guys, you're at the stadium for 1 week, then you're at an affiliate for a week, and then you're down in the Dominican for a week. Like you're all over the place.
Well,
So
it's funny because compare with one of the guys who reportedly turned down the chance to interview, is John Daniels, who I guess he's working with the Rays now, obviously connected with the Rangers because he was there for like 17
yeah,
years
but
or
he still
something.
lives in
But
Texas.
he still lives in Texas, even though
Yeah,
he works for the Rays now.
yeah,
Like, that's the thing is like he doesn't want to move, and therefore he can't take a head job because you
yeah.
can't do that remotely.
No,
So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, Thad Levine as the assistant GM of the Twins is interesting.
yep.
Um, Emerged as an early kind of top candidate. I don't have strong feelings about those guys because here's the thing: like, if you have strong feelings about this, you're guessing.
Yeah,
Like, let's be frank here: you're guessing because you don't know. Like, yes, to some degree, you can base it on what a team did, right?
but you don't know who's like none of these guys other than Huntington have a pure track record of what that we can say this is what they've done as the
Mhm.
chief decision maker.
Yeah, we don't know.
And
It's yeah.
Huntington, like the Pirates made the
Mm,
playoffs. He also
mm,
authored two
mm,
really bad trades. Let's just say
mhm.
it, what they are. Like the
That's
the the
glass now,
the
and
Chris Archer trade is one of the worst trades of all time,
yeah,
and the Garrett Cole trade was not very good either. And
right.
so it's like
I don't
that's a
see the
tough
fit.
one. And like
I
yeah,
don't see the fit.
um, but
I
other
think
than
that was to interview someone who had
but that's
experience.
the point is he at
Is the
least has
point?
had experience. The other guys,
Yeah,
we there's nothing that like none of the Cubs trades we can attribute to Craig Breslow. Like he's done a great job helping with their pitching staff. Like the pitching
right.
for the Cubs has
Well,
become a strength, but like you know what I mean? It's so
if I can
it's
counter that, when you're an assistant GM, you're at least virtually in the room.
correct, but you're not the one who's saying like he's not the one who's
Correct.
like, hey, we should go sign Cody Bellinger for 1 year,
Correct.
17 million, which turned into a
Yeah.
great contract. Like
My God,
so
didn't it?
I just think that it's hard to have a strong opinion on any of these candidates for that reason.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
until we see what the kind of the final structure looks like,
Yeah.
it's just a lot of like maybe they'll do this, maybe they'll do that. We just don't know. And I think the more interesting thing to me, frankly, by right now is who's turned down or is not a
Yeah. Yeah.
candidate
That's where I was going
because
next to.
they definitely took some swings. Like
Yeah.
Derek Falvey, for example, that's a
Yeah.
big swing
Yeah.
with
I
the
mean, they were
Twins.
never going to get Falvey. They were never going
No,
to get, Hazen.
no,
Even Amiel Sade, who, the Diamondbacks smartly locked up with an extension. Like, now's not the time you leave Arizona,
no.
right? Like, you because here's the one thing too is like I think we might have mentioned this last time is that there's only 30 of these jobs, right? But that said, it's not like once you get the shot at one, if it doesn't go right, you're definitely getting another one, right? Like you might get one shot at one of those 30. And so I get if you're only going to get one shot at one of those 30 positions, wanting to make sure it's on your terms.
Yeah.
In a position you want to be in where, you're not looking over your shoulder once you hit year 4.
Yeah.
I get it.
Well, and I think that's something that a lot of the writers have talked about is that from people they've talked to around the game is they've heard some concerns about.
Some are saying,
yeah,
many are saying
that, the last couple of heads of baseball ops have only lasted 4 years.
That's 3.
Yeah, exactly. You're inheriting a situation where you're not really going to get to bring your own people in, and that can be a strength too. I'm not like saying either way, but they've got a well-established structure here and you're kind of just coming in at the top, but it's going to be, I think it might be a little harder to make your mark, down the organization when everything's already in place, even including the manager. And it's things like that could make the difference where it's like, if you're like Derek Falvey, you already do that with the Twins. Would you want to come into a situation like that? Maybe not, but like he clearly didn't in this time. Or like Brandon Gomes with the Dodgers. He obviously, I think he cited, he talked
family.
about that he has a young family too. But yeah, that's a big switch from LA to Boston. Sam Fold also is, I think, another one who may or may not have been asked, but wasn't interested.
I mean, that's Philly to Boston. I think that's a little less. I mean, I guess you're still moving your family, but
but he wasn't interested. Like,
he just wasn't interested. Yeah.
Yeah. Or whatever. We don't know exactly.
Well, it was funny because the initial reporting was the number of people that were turning down the job, and like the report, like including one local guy, and it was like, oh, they're talking about Fold or Gomes, and it turns out, oh, they meant both.
Yeah,
they meant both of them.
Yeah,
that was very interesting. Michael Hill was another guy that got mentioned early on. He used to run the Marlins operation. He's now in MLB. And it's interesting. I've heard like conflicting reports. It sounds like the situation is he does eventually want to go back to running a team, but right now is happy at MLB.
But I thought I read somewhere that he would be interested in the Marlins job.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, was he just kind of, being nice when that got out there? I don't know. It's interesting the number of no's they've got.
The other names, I think Josh Burns has been mentioned. He used to work for the Red Sox.
So there's 3 that I have as people who've been mentioned. That it's just been mentioned as possible fits, not as reported interest. Josh Burns was one who was in the Theo Epstein front office tree. Left to take. He was in San Diego and he was in Arizona first, then San Diego, I believe.
Correct.
He's been mentioned. James Click has been mentioned. He's been mentioned since day one. All right, quick interjection here. James Click today, after we recorded this episode, apparently turned down an opportunity to interview for the job. But here's what we had to say about him anyway. It seems pretty clear why you would want to interview him. I mean, he's probably, as far as head guys, like. It is interesting that he's leaving a situation where he was getting second guessed by the manager and ownership. That's would he be interested in the Red Sox? I mean, he was like, literally, I hadn't realized that like Dusty Baker literally vetoed a essentially done trade for Wilson Contreras, and that's why they went ahead and traded for Christian Vasquez. I don't think I must have known that at some point, but it didn't forgot.
Worked out well for the Red Sox, I'll say.
Worked out great for the Red Sox. Yes, but you could see why they'd be interested in Click. I have heard that, like, why would you want another guy who was with the Rays? Like, it's not about whether or not you've been with the Rays. Like, you can have you're your own person. Like, I don't know. He ran the show in Houston after that, or you know what I mean? Like, he actually ran the show, whereas like Chaim Bloom had not run the show in Tampa. The other name getting connected with the Red Sox potentially is Kim Eng, who has been the GM of the Marlins and declined her half of a mutual option to leave the Marlins when they basically I think the 2 issues were they were going to bring in someone above her, and
that's wild, by the way,
that they were going to bring in someone above her. Yeah, that's a little weird. I mean, it's what the Red Sox did to Ben Cherington. Like,
fair.
It's exactly, and it's kind of funny because I was just thinking this when you were talking earlier. Is like, it's weird to think of the fact that Bloom's dismissal of the last 3 head of baseball ops dismissals
It's the
was like
cleanest.
the least weird
Yeah.
because it was pretty weird.
Yeah.
Like the fact that you didn't give him, like, I get, like, it seems it's like, okay, it's strange, but I guess I kind of get it. Whereas like with Dombrowski, it was like, whoa, really? Like,
Yeah.
and the one before was like Sherrington, like, we want you to stay, but you're going to be under Dave Dombrowski now in August. Like, hey, we're doing this thing. Like, he's in our box during this game. We're going to announce that he's getting hired. Like, what?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah. I
okay.
forgot how I remember just because of obviously Dombrowski's been in the news a
Yeah, the
lot
way the
lately with the
Dombrowski one went
Phillies.
down was
I
weird.
completely had forgotten that. And then when I looked at it, I was like, oh yeah, that's that's
Yeah.
something.
This front off,
Yeah.
this not front,
Well,
this
no, no, no.
ownership, the way they do this,
And
man.
remember, Hazen was also caught up in the Dombrowski thing too.
Was he?
Yeah, Hazen was the general
Because,
manager.
well, he was Dombrowski's GM. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and
Right.
and then he left because when
I mean, he didn't get caught up in it. He got promoted to GM when Sherrington left, and
and
then
then decided to leave when he went to.
when he
But
got
my
the
point is
Diamondbacks head
he went
job.
to Arizona. Yeah,
Yeah, that's normal progression. Like,
I
I don't
guess
think
so.
that that's
Yeah,
caught up in it. That's just
yeah.
like he was the
I
guy that
just
got
meant
elevated.
he was involved in it or he was
Sure.
there. Yeah,
Yeah. 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 It's strange the way this always goes down. I mean, like, I know one of the questions that one of the emails we got, Ian, is, do you have any personal favorites? Or, I mean, I don't. I mean, like, we've had Eddie Romero and Paul Taboni on the podcast, so that'd be neat.
yeah.
Like, otherwise, I don't know. Like, I honestly don't know.
I think I kind of said it earlier that we'll just it's a wait and see approach. We'll see who
Yeah.
gets it, and we'll go from there because it's hard to have an opinion without the track record of moves or time running a team on guys. I think that just looking at it, it's guys with or excuse me, I shouldn't say guys. It's a group
Individuals.
of individuals
Yep.
with strong backgrounds in a variety of different aspects of baseball operations. You've got people involved in the scouting internationally, player development,
Yeah.
everything. And
Yeah.
I think that that's what they're looking for is someone who will be able to bridge that gap and kind of bring all those aspects of baseball ops together
Yep.
in a way that everything can work cohesively and kind of combine all of them into putting the best possible product on the field. And I think that that's definitely something that the Red Sox, I think, under Chaim Bloom struggled with a little bit in the sense that I think it got a very analytical.
The one thing that I do want to hear, though, is that I want there to be a much clearer, or not that I want, there needs to be a very clear A, line of communication, and B, setting of expectations from ownership, because this is the second dismissal of a head of baseball operations where we said, to a large degree, the things that the head of baseball operations did that got them fired are things that ownership probably should have put the kibosh on sooner. With Dombrowski, it was the handing out of contracts that ownership had to sign off on. If you did not want Dombrowski to do that, you needed to make the point clearer then.
Yeah.
You don't say, yes, this is fine, but I'm going to fire you for it in 6 months.
Yeah.
Like, that's stupid. With Bloom, he was brought in to build the farm, build up more sustainable model, improved a lot of processes behind the scenes, right? There are things that improve that are not visible to the layperson on the Major League Diamond and at Fenway. If there was an expectation that more needed to be done with the Major League team, it doesn't strike me, looking at what was done, that was made clear. That if they wanted more wins on the Major League roster, I think that needed to be made clearer, and it needed to be made clearer sooner. I think there's a certain amount of, like, this ownership just will go straight from "you're our guy" to "you are fired," as opposed to making clear, like, hey, because there's degrees, right? There's what can I not think of the Astros guy? Jim Crane. There's Jim Crane level meddling, right? And telling you who should be starting in the rotation. And there's complete absenteeism and dropping in just to fire you from the job. I think there's a happy medium there where there's an open line of communication that make clear what's expected out of the person in this position. And that's not what we've gotten at Fenway in the past decade, I think. I think that's been the case. And yeah, it's good to let your guy do his job, but it's also good to set expectations of what they're supposed to be doing so that they can then go and carry that out per ownership's expectations. So we'll have more when there is more. But for now, that's where things are at. It sounds like they're getting pretty close to the number of names they brought in. It sounds like that, they're at a point in the process where we might start hearing finalists or that kind of thing. Maybe I don't know. When you hear 7, 8 names have been interviewed, in theory there'll be some movement soon. It seems like this is the point in the process, Ian, where they float names publicly to make sure nothing comes out, right, or to see what the reaction is. So I think that's the part of the process we're at. So we'll see where that goes. And then one other thing, I guess, on the major league side of things before we get to the AFL, 4 coaches let go between Fenway and Worcester. At Fenway, Dave Bush, pitching coach, was let go, as well as third base coach, which more importantly, kind of infield coach, Carlos Fablis, was let go. And then in AAA, the Red Sox let go of longtime minor league pitching coach Paul Abbott and AAA assistant hitting coach Mike Montville. Abbott probably the most surprising to me, Ian, but you could kind of see how between him and Bush it goes hand in glove, maybe, just in terms of the high level pitching apparatus they had going there, as well as just with Feblis, when you say infield defense in the 2023 Boston Red Sox, I guess you kind of see where that might have headed.
Yeah,
it is
I
interesting.
think when you look at the Red Sox last year, what were the 2 areas we talked about the most was the pitching and the defense.
Yep.
And they've decided to make a move there. So I can't say I'm terribly surprised. With Abbott too, if you look at Worcester, the pitching staff as a whole there was pretty rough last year.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing to me was a decent number of pitchers went up from Portland where they were performing really well and really struggled when they got to Worcester. And
it's Drohan mostly, right? Like, I mean,
Drohan, but also the relievers too. And like Ryan Fernandez, guys like that. But obviously some of that is going to be you're facing more advanced competition. But
sure,
with Drohan especially, there was just some weird stuff going on with his pitch mix. And I didn't love what I was seeing up there with how he was tinkering with things. So, I mean, I know Paul Abbott is, as you said, has been around, but clearly they're looking to they've kind of overhauled almost the entire pitching department these last couple of years, bringing in the driveline guys, and now they're going to have a new pitching coach at AAA and
the
majors. So it's pretty
Yep.
interesting. They're definitely looking to kind of tighten up or change up what they're doing with that part, development group.
Well played.
Thank you. And I think though it's just it's going to be interesting to see who they bring in there. And I do wonder though, maybe they'll probably wait for a new head of baseball ops before they hire those new coaches. But
I would presume.
Yeah. So we'll see there. Because it is interesting if they'll wait for that, but they have been making some moves. There are some transactions too from the major league side that have still been going on.
Yeah, and people have asked. The team is being run by a committee of Eddie Romero, Raquel Ferreira, Mike Groupman, and all those other kind of lieutenants they have. BOH still being here, Brian O'Halloran's I'm sure involved to some degree. And based on the reporting, it sounds like Eddie Romero is the one kind of leading the charge. But I'm sure it's in less of a like he is the man in charge so much as like, Eddie run this along with these people. Okay. Because there are things that need to happen in the meantime, right? You can't just sit there twiddling your thumbs. There are moves that need to be made. On field, I guess as far as the major league club goes, the primary move that was made is that the Red Sox put Caleb Ort on outright waivers, and he was claimed by the Seattle Mariners. Interesting that they did not wait for a head of baseball ops to come in to do that. But to me, I guess it makes sense. Like, look, these are kind of the fringe 40-man moves. The person who comes in is probably going to be deferring to the people who are here on things like fringe 40-man relief pitchers, right? Especially a guy like Ort, who was hurt for a significant part of the year. You put guys on waivers. If you look last year, the Red Sox did the same thing. They put about 6 guys on waivers in October, 3 of whom cleared, 3 of whom got claimed. And so this is a time of year you try and sneak guys through while, the playoff teams are in the playoffs and other teams still have full 40-man rosters because their free agents aren't gone yet, right? So you try to put guys through, or it was going to have to come off the 60-man roster to get added back on. So, okay, we don't want to add him back, cut him loose and see if he clears and gets through to the minors, and you see what happens from there. So, happy trails. Well, trails to Caleb Ort. Other moves, really just kind of, it's not the Red Sox making moves, but some guys who are on the major league roster who are outright at elected free agency. That list includes Kyle Bearclaw, Christian Arroyo, Caleb Hamilton, and Yu Chang.
None of those are that surprising.
No, well, that's they have the right to based on the fact that they had been outrighted during the year. If it's not your first season in which you were outrighted, and or if you have a certain amount of if you have 3 or more years of service time, you can elect free agency after being outrighted. So, not surprising there. Shall we move to on field, Ian, in the Arizona Fall League? It's really the only baseball happening right now, Red Sox wise. Although I say on field. Unfortunately, it's not just on field. Probably the biggest news is that Brian Bonacy, who's we've got him ranked 11 right now, Ian, on the Sox prospects rankings. Middle infielder Brian Bonacy was part of the Arizona Fall League contingent. He was removed from the Arizona Fall League roster, and he reportedly has been placed on the restricted list for violating the minor league joint domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse policy. He was sent home from the Arizona Fall League after 2 games. And for context here, Bonacy did spend the last month of the regular season in Portland on the restricted list as well. Obviously not great. We know nothing about what happened. Nothing has been reported. Nothing is out there. Not a peep.
Yeah.
Not good, obviously.
Nope.
The the defense lawyer in me is compelled to say we don't know what happened. The name of that policy makes you think the worst as a human nature. Domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse.
It's not a good policy name to be caught up in.
Yeah, it's not good to be caught up in. There's no okay reason to be placed on the restricted list because you're being investigated for a violation of that policy.
No.
We don't necessarily know what he did yet. No. It could be as bad as it sounds, for sure. It could be something a lot less bad than that sounds.
It's one you just can't speculate. You just have to let the process play out, and that's about it. Like I don't think it's the time or a discussion to be like, what is, how does that impact his offseason or like his offseason, status or anything future with the Red Sox? Like, who knows?
Everything's on the table.
We're going to let it play out, and
everything's on the table.
Once we get more information, we'll address it then. But
everything from like he doesn't miss a game to he never plays professional baseball again is on the table. Like, who knows?
I mean, we just don't know.
We have no idea. So we'll have to wait and see. He is Rule 5 eligible. We'll see. You have to imagine it's not even secondary. It's like tertiary to whatever happened. We'll see how that affects, it seems clear that he's not going to get protected and he's not going to get selected at this point. But again, who knows? It's speculation. Yeah. Maybe news comes out before then. On field. So obviously Bonacy only played in 2 games. The Red Sox contingent there on the hitting side. We told you last time Corey Rosier and Nathan Hickey are there. Rosier has played in 10 games. He's hitting 325, 372, 425 with 3 steals on 3 attempts. Doing Corey Rosier.
It's the most
things.
Corey Rosier line. Yeah.
I mean, he's actually hitting for a 100 ISOP is not awful, but like it's 2 doubles and a triple.
I mean, it's what we talked about.
Speed based.
He
runs.
He's good at what he does.
Yep.
He runs really fast. He knows that. He puts the ball in play. He takes walks. Like play some defense. That's a good combo to have.
Yeah.
Especially in the way baseball is being played these days.
Yeah. Nathan Hickey has played in 8 games. He's caught 3, DH'd in 5. He is hitting 174. He's 4 for 23 and has walked 11 times.
That's not surprising either.
He has a 441 on base.
Hickey really, he knows
no extra base hits. No extra base hits is the surprising piece of it.
But it's 20 at bats, right?
23 at bats, and he struck out in 13 of them.
He walks a lot. He strikes out a lot. Yeah.
Well, he doesn't strike out this much.
He was 23% or so during the season, I want to say.
Yeah, and that's like
I mean, but it's a small sample.
13 strikeouts out of 34 plate appearances. That's in like a third.
He was actually 27% in
was it 27% in Portland?
In Double-A this year.
Okay. All right. So he's over 30% right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's too high, but it's a small sample. And I think the other thing you got to remember too is in the AFL especially.
Oh, that too. Yep.
The pitching you're seeing is better, and it's a lot of guys are shorter stints. So you're seeing a lot of max effort stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like relievers are going out there and throwing hard. Starters are only going 3, 4, 5 innings. So, you're seeing Ricky Tiedemann for 3 innings. You're getting his best stuff for those 3 innings.
Jackson Job.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So, and I there are some big name pitchers out there. We just obviously mentioned 2 of them. So there's a third one though is on the Red Sox, obviously. That's
there's one more hitter we have to mention.
I was trying to transition to Zach.
I know you were, but we can't. For Tyler McDonough got added to the roster. We initially thought he was replacing Bonesy. We heard, and Rob Bradford also reported that McDonough was going to get added to the roster either way. He fills a hole on the roster, fills a hole in the Red Sox contingent. So I buy it.
Yeah, they only had 3 hitters, so
they only had 3 hitters. It makes sense that they add a 4th and that he's a utility guy to play wherever the team needs him in Glendale. He's 0 for 6, but he's only played in 2 games, so give him time. Transitioning to that pitcher, the best pitcher the Red Sox sent there, as everyone expected entering the season, it's Zach Penrod, who is their starter. He has made 2 starts in 8 innings. He has allowed 4 hits and 5 walks, striking out 9. I think the 5 walks, 4 of them came in his first start or something. 1.13 ERA. Zach Penrod, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Ian, your thoughts?
I said he's good.
I know.
There's when I saw him, I think we talked about it when I saw Greenville.
You did immediately say he's going to go to AFL.
Yeah, and he's inside our top 50 for a reason. I think he's legitimately good. Mm-hmm. He's a lefty up to 96, and it was nice. His first start was at the park that has the Statcast or the Hawkeye going.
Yes,
and so you could see he was up to 97, I think. Yeah, 96.7 with his fastball. Changeup he got 4 whiffs on it on 7 swings, so 57% whiff rate on his changeup in that first start. That'll play.
Is that good?
Yeah, it's very good. And slider also, got a couple had a whiff also, mid 80s slider. Statcast I think screwed or the Hawkeye messed up, and he was I'm pretty sure he's throwing a cutter also. It just didn't count it as that, but. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of wild watching him go out there and actually perform because this is better. I would say the hitting competition is better than obviously what he faced at Greenville this year.
Mm-hmm.
And he's more than holding his own. And I think it's interesting that the national media started to take notice. Like, I don't know if you saw, he was featured on like MLB.com. Baseball America guys are tweeting about him now. He's definitely got interesting. And
you heard it here first.
He's a pretty interesting 40-man consideration for this offseason. I don't think he would get popped, but if someone really likes him, you could make the case that a 26-year-old lefty up to 97,
throw him in the bullpen
and see what happens.
I think that's one where you have to almost dare teams to do it, though.
I think so too.
But can't protect him.
The fact that we're even floating this is kind of a wild.
He's going to be in Portland, like.
Yeah, but he's also, if he's 26, the fact that he just jumped from independent
is it weirder than protecting Brandon Walter last year?
Well, no, they protected. It's a good point.
I mean, it's weirder in that he wasn't an indie. Walter wasn't an.
I think
right?
a better. Well, he's also older than Walter, I believe, right? Or no, he's younger than Walter. Yeah. So I guess the better question would be is if he was just on the roster at the beginning of the season and just broke out in Greenville this year and was going to start in Portland, would we be looking at it differently?
I mean, what's the comp? Like Grant Gambrell from the left side with better stuff.
I mean, he's got better stuff than Brandon Walter does right now. Let's be honest. Like, he does.
It's interesting. It's very interesting. It's going to be interesting to see where we rank him at the season and the rankings, which are going to be next month.
I mean, I'm interested too to hear. I
need to hear from scouts who are in Arizona.
Yeah, who's seen him in the fall league to see what they think, because he's tied for second in the league in strikeouts. And this is as of a few days ago, so I don't know what.
Not
the most
anymore.
Recent,
no, he's got 9, and I'm looking at his own team. They're two guys with 10
this
and
was
a guy with 11.
This was through 2 starts. So
that's because because Kendall Williams got a 3rd start.
Yeah,
so that's
he
why he's
made his 3rd starts. But
yeah,
like he's missing.
Yeah, all of those guys. Yeah, Jake Eater had made his 3rd start too.
He's missing bats. He doesn't give up a lot of hits. The walks, he's got to tighten up the control. And this is something that was also an issue in some of his outings in Greenville this year. But it's a really good arm. And it's going to be fascinating to see what kind of happens with him over the next couple of weeks. Because I honestly do think the rest of the AFL and what scouts think of him there is going to go a long way to determining what they have to do with him with the 40-man roster.
I agree. The other pitchers, the three relievers there are Brian Mata, Christopher Troy, and Felix Cepeda. Their ERAs are all over 9, but it's because basically like last week, each of them had one blow up outing.
Yeah, it's a hard thing because they've all thrown 3 to 5 innings. So if you have one bad outing,
4, and 4.
Oh yeah.
They've all thrown 4 innings.
Our page. I was looking at our page. It hasn't updated with their most recent outing, I don't think. But yeah, and isn't Wyatt Olds pitching in relief too?
Oh, Wyatt Olds too. They've got 5. That's why it was okay. That's why it wasn't weird that they had three position players, because they had 5 pitchers. Yeah, Wyatt Olds is at a 3.60 ERA. He's got 5 innings and 3 outings. 3 hits, 3 walks, 4 Ks. But I think the walks, like those might have come in one outing, because I think his first outing he didn't have any walks. So 176 batting average against is nice for Olds, but his thing is always control. So yeah, I mean with like Mata, like I care more about the fact that there's a 5 strikeout to no walk ratio in 4 innings than I do about the hits and runs. Troy had one blow up outing where he didn't record an out and gave up 5 runs. Like his line's going to suck for the AFL. Like you can't look at the line. You got to look at the game by game to see what's happening, because he did have the one blow up outing. We'll see how it goes from here for all those guys. But it's, good so far. It's just it's the AFL. The thing with Hickey is that he's in 3 games behind the plate, 1 for 9, throwing out potential base stealers. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But after going, throwing out 10 out of 139, was it, during the year that I just sent to the Slack, Ian? Yeah.
It was bad during the season.
Yeah, he threw out. I know he threw out 10 out of, I think, 100. And they were 100.
It was 10 out of 139.
Yeah, so not what you're looking for there. So
no, I mean it's something
we'll talk more about him in a bit.
I've said a decent amount is that scouts would like to see him at other positions, because it's probably not going to work at catcher. But I completely understand with his bat why you try it at catcher as long as you do.
It's extremely valuable if you can figure it out there.
Yeah.
So that's the AFL. And I guess to kind of close this out before, last kind of segment before we get to emails, this is something that it was kind of your idea. So why don't you go ahead and introduce to people what your idea was to kind of throw a discussion option into this episode of the podcast.
Sure. I think that something that kind of gets maybe not undervalued, or it's just not really talked about that much, is how much work gets put in the off season and how important that is for kind of setting that base and getting everything ready to ramp up for the following season. And I thought it would be an interesting exercise to kind of list off a few players who we think basically this is a very pivotal off season for them for whatever reason. And just as we're kind of eliminating, we're not going to do the injured guys, because that's obvious. If a guy like Marcelo Meyer is coming off an injury, okay, maybe we are.
Yeah, I was going to say you are.
Okay, fair.
So,
let's.
Well, ignore it. Well, hold on. We'll say this. It's like literally, if you're literally just rehabbing a recent injury, that is one thing.
Yeah.
So take Marcelo Meyer out. Take guys that are like rehabbing Tommy John out. Like,
yeah,
you need to go rehab the injury and come back healthy. That's not what we're talking about. That's a fair way to put it.
Correct. It's guys who the work they put in here is kind of what we're looking for and why we think this is a pivotal offseason for them. And I think we each came up with 3 names. And so do you want to start?
Behest.
Yes.
You want me to start? Or you want to start?
You should go first.
Okay, fair enough. All right. So one guy who, when you said this, my mind immediately went to is a guy who we've already touched on in Brian Mata. Mata injured for most of last year, and he has had injury issues throughout his career. He has had conditioning issues at times in his career. His effort got questioned this year by Sean Havland in one of the more pointed, direct sort of quotes I've heard since doing this, honestly, about a guy and the work he was doing in between starts. It seems clear he's a bullpen guy now. He was working in the bullpen at the end of last year. He's working in the bullpen in Arizona. He does not have any options remaining. He needs to make the major league roster. The only reason we thought about maybe not listing him here is like, is he even going to make it through the offseason on the 40 man? I think he will. I think with a guy with Mata's talent level, you need to at least get him to spring training. After that, all bets are off. But I want to see what he looks like in the spring. And he needs to make a good impression in the spring because he needs to make the major league club. He needs to convince the Red Sox that they not only like that he is one of the 26 best major league players they have coming out of camp, or at least
and you can't just do that in a 6-8 week stretch, however long spring training is.
No, he needs to start with him work now.
It starts now in the fall league and it needs to continue the entire offseason.
No question. And so, for him putting in the work, being ready to go, learning to pitch in relief, which he hadn't done really prior to the end of this season, is going to be hugely important. And so it's a huge offseason leading into a huge camp for him. He was a pretty obvious name for me. Who's your first guy, Ian?
I like it. That's a good one. My first guy, it somewhat violates my rule about the injuries, but doesn't.
Yeah, I was going to say
because his injury was so long ago. It was back in early June, I want to say, maybe even May.
It was May.
Yep. Yeah, because it's Miguel Bleis, and
yeah,
I think that he obviously had a really tough year. He was really struggling. He was playing through an injury clearly. Then he got hurt really pretty seriously. He had surgery. But I remember going back to spring training and he was really not really rough in spring training when I saw him. And I just think that with him, he's got to kind of eliminate those distractions and just focus on baseball and come into camp ready to go, both with a fully healthy shoulder, but also having put in a good offseason of work on the diamond. And I think that it's been good to see he started to ramp up his baseball activity already. I think he's posted some videos of him hitting, doing things like that at the facility. And I think with him that, this is a pretty big year for him. He came into last season as obviously, a helium prospect in the top 100 of some lists nationally.
All the helium, yeah.
Serious upside. A lot of other teams were very interested in him, obviously, if with the Red Sox potentially in a trade. And now his stock it's probably at the lowest it's been in some time. It's a lot of questions now, and him having a productive offseason where he's engaged, he's getting stronger, he's putting in that work to translate those raw tools that he has to on-field performance is important. And that's something that you can't just do as going back to what you talked about with Mata. You can't just do that in the 8 weeks of spring training. That's a year-round process, especially when you're someone, he's 20 or 19 years old. He's going to be 19 years old the entire offseason. You got to just put out the distractions and just focus on baseball this offseason. And I think that, hopefully that's something that he can do and just focus on getting himself ready for next season, both coming into camp healthy, but also coming in having a strong baseline with it both in the weight room and on the field with his off-season workouts.
Yeah, I mean, and just getting better, like more physical. Like he's still young,
he's still skinny. He's got to start filling out. He's got to,
it's time to start that physical transition.
Yeah, but it's also too. It's also I want to see some development at the plate where he's working on the off season and working on his pitch recognition. Seeing a bunch of breaking balls from pitchers, things like that. He needs to get those reps because he missed so many of them this season.
He was getting eaten up when he was hitting in the spring by those.
Oh, he was really struggling when I saw him in camp. But yeah, so for me, it's a very pivotal offseason for him in trying to reestablish himself as one of the top 100 prospects nationally in baseball.
Sure. I like it. I guess I'll double back to a guy we talked about already once again in Nathan Hickey. I mentioned we were going to come back to him. I don't know what the big work is for him this offseason, whether it is if the catching thing is going to work, the stolen base numbers need to get improved a significant amount. I get the game is different now, but you cannot allow 129 out of 139 attempted base stealers to reach. That's just not going to work. It's 8 out of 9 in the AFL in 3 games. It's either clean that up and get the work in and look, he's never going to be what Wong turned into behind the plate, where he was one of the top 5 catchers and runs saved based on their arm with base stealers this past year. I saw the graphic where they were touting Gabby Moreno, but Wong was on there. He's never going to be that, but you got to at least, be serviceable back there. I mean, look at what it did to the team early in the year when McGuire couldn't throw anyone out, and before Wong got his feet under him. The question is it doing that, or is it learning another position? Right? Is it learning first? Is it learning left? Is it do you try it in left field first? I am very curious what the Red Sox are going to do there. It seems like you start him in Double-A again. I can't see him going to Triple-A to start. The Red Sox are going to have Steven Scott. I would put Eli Marrero in Triple-A, even though he can't really hit. He would hit ninth every time he was playing in Portland. At least he can handle the position defensively at Triple-A, and that's really more important. And they're certainly going to bring in someone else from outside in that Caleb Hamilton role again as well. I start him in Double-A, but I'm just very curious where that's going to go. And look, he's getting passed by Kyle Teel at catcher right now too. So the path to the major leagues as the catcher of the future is just really kind of blocked for Nathan Hickey right now as well. So, maybe that time in the offseason is learning left field, is learning first base, getting those reps in and being comfortable there in the spring as well. So that I think is a big offseason for him. Who you got next, Ian?
My next one is a pitcher who actually I think we briefly mentioned earlier, but it's Shane Drohan.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to see him. Obviously, last offseason, he had a really good, strong offseason. He got stronger. He got
Put the work
bigger.
in.
He's throwing harder, developed a new pitch, came into the season, looked great in Portland. And I was just kind of starting my offseason prep, starting my end of season rankings. And I feel like we forgot how good he was in Portland because
Lights
how much
out.
he struggled in Worcester.
Mm-hmm.
In 34 innings, he gave up 19 hits, 9 walks, 36 strikeouts, 1 home run. Like, he was dominant for those 6 starts. He got up to Worcester. He had a couple good starts, a couple bad starts, and then kind of it went downhill from there. And by the end of the season, the stuff had kind of backed up a little bit. His pitch makes a change. That cutter was gone, and now it's kind of more of a true slider. And I just think that this offseason is about kind of finding himself as a pitcher. And I'd like to see him continue to get stronger like he did last offseason. That's kind of a given. But it's finding, are you going to be throwing a cutter or are you going to be throwing a slider? What is your fourth pitch going to be? And is getting his body in a position where he can hold his stuff for 150, 120, 130, 140, 150 innings. And I think there was a significant deterioration as the season went on with his stuff. And that's something, as you get in the upper levels and you're approaching the majors, which he is, he should be pushing for a major league call up at some point this season.
No question.
And that likely won't come until the second half of the season. And he needs to still have his best stuff by then. And getting to that point is key for him. And I think
he has
that
the stuff he
starts.
had. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and getting to that point, the work starts now. It's the off season is him doing what he did last season and continuing to transition his body, get stronger and get to the point where physically he feels ready to handle the rigors of a full minor league. And then hopefully for him at the end of the season, a major league season.
Yeah. And I mean, I was going to say, like, if he goes to Worcester and does what he did to start the year this year, he could easily get up to the major leagues in May.
Yeah.
If they need a spot start.
Oh, 100%. I mean,
easily.
I forgot he got 90 innings in AAA
he's going
last
to be
year.
I should say he's going to be because they're going to add him.
He got 90 innings in AAA last year.
Yeah,
that's a non-insignificant amount. If he performs well, he's 100% pushing for a call up next season. So I think for him, it's just continuing to build on what he did last offseason. But more important to me is finding that fourth pitch. Are you going to be a cutter guy or are you going to be a slider guy? I don't like going back and forth between the two of them depending on the outing. I'd prefer if he just decided on one and just stuck with it.
Yep, it's figuring out what kind of pitcher he is and focusing it and going from there. I agree. My third player is one much ink has been spilled over, but I almost didn't even want to use him because it just feels like a cheat. But Noah Song, who is going to get to play baseball this offseason for the first time in a long time, needs to do the work if this is what he wants to do. The player we saw after he was returned is not a guy we would have otherwise ranked in our top 60. He's ranked in the top 60. Yeah.
Understandably, his stuff just backed up a lot.
Yeah. He is ranked based on what he did in 2019 now. Based on the fact that it's understandable that he's not there yet. But he needs to get there and quick now because at this point, He will turn,
He
let's
turns
see,
27 in May.
turns 27 in May.
Yeah.
We were just talking about Zach Penrod as old. I think Song is older. Put it that way.
He is. He's actually, I think, like a year older.
May
No,
28th
May
of
97,
97,
May 28th, 97, June. Actually, no, he's like a month older.
a
Sorry.
month older. But
Yeah.
that said, like,
But yeah, that's
he's
the point
older
is,
than
yeah.
the guy they signed out of the indie leagues who'd been there for like 3 years.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so Song's got to figure out what he is, needs to focus, really needs to put the work in training. Um, eh, look, he focused on the military while he was in the military. That makes perfect sense. If he wants to make the baseball thing work, he needs to put that same focus into baseball this offseason. It's definitely not even a make or break year. It's going to be pretty quick. It's going to be pretty clear whether he's got it or not. So
Yeah,
he's
I think that
not going
is
to
the
have a lot
thing
of
with
time
him.
here.
We're gonna know pretty early next season. I think, by May, we're gonna have an idea of where he's at. And
Yeah,
he's gonna have a baseball offseason doing, baseball conditioning. Maybe he'll go to Driveline or go to one of those, pitching performance centers. But we'll have a pretty good idea of where, how much of his stuff is going to be able to come back, because there is a pretty big gap right now between what he showed last year and what he was back pre-military service. And the question is, how much, if any, can he retain of that kind of stuff?
sure. Yep.
And that's what we need to see this offseason is what happens this offseason. It's going to go a long way, because it's hard to imagine, he go through this offseason, goes through all of next year, and then we get to the following offseason and we're asking the same questions. I think
No,
it's hard to expect it to come back
we're
after
going to
this
know by
offseason.
May.
Yeah. This offseason is the one that's going to determine how much of it comes back for him. And I think
Yep.
that's a really good one.
I agree. Yep. And who's your third?
My final one is a little different, because this person played the entire season healthy. But their season, their performance was good. It wasn't great, I would say. And it's
I
Nick
think I know where
York.
you're going. Oh,
It's Nick
okay.
York.
Yep. Okay.
Nick York is in a very interesting position, because
He is.
this is, I believe that he has to be added to the 40-minute. No, he's not Rule 5 eligible this offseason.
Nope.
But what is he?
Yeah.
I'm kind of serious with that question. He shows flashes of, really good hitting ability. His defense has definitely improved. It's not great, but it's, it's maybe like a 45 now. Maybe you can get to a 50 there. And that's work put in the offseason. But you gotta have a carrying tool. And I just, with the constant tinkering he's been doing at the plate, he needs to really get comfortable this offseason with his hitting mechanics and get to a point where he's heading into next season feeling good of where he's at. Because we saw it this season, he came in with that really high, with his hands way up there and that weird timing.
Bat pointing
And
downward
yeah,
thing.
and then he
Yeah.
just, by midseason, he had just scrapped that and it was back to a more kind of normal linear swing. And
But then he went back to it, didn't he?
no, he went back to like the normal one at the end of the season.
Okay. All right. All right.
But I don't, guys who tinker in season, it tends to not go that well.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see him, and he's completely healthy from everything we know, which is good, because obviously he's had his injury issues before, but he's going to have a healthy offseason. And I think I'd like to see him just come in feeling comfortable of where he is mechanically. And whether that be, working out with whoever's hitting coaches or going to one of the hitting factories that are all over the country to work on things like, get the bat speed up, things like that. But he's got to not to kind of lock in with some mechanics and start kind of get to a point where we can decide, is he a future everyday second base option for the Red Sox? Is he more of a trade chip? Like, what is he? And I'm unsure right now, because there are some good metrics with him. There are also some not very good ones. There's a little bit of excessive swing and miss in zone. There's he does, 122 strikeouts and 444 bats is a decent number for someone with an advanced hit tool. You'd like to see that. The power, 430 slug this year in Double-A is, you'd like to see a little more there. I think that it's, for him, it's a pretty pivotal offseason in kind of figuring out what he is going to be as a player. Is he going to be someone who, sacrifices a little hit to hit from a little more power? Is he someone who's going to focus, go back to kind of what we saw back during 2021 season, where he was just hitting line drives all over the park, not striking out that much, things like that. And so I think that this offseason for him is important in kind of figuring out what he wants to do at his plate, both approach wise, mechanically, all those things. And coming into camp with mechanics that he's comfortable with, that he's seeing the ball well, is the most important thing for him.
I like it. I like it. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one. Cool.
Because when I was thinking is if you look, I've had this conversation with scouts, and it's you don't want to see guys making major swing overhaul changes in season.
Yeah, it's
Like
weird.
that's just not a good sign.
No.
And this is the time to make those changes and to get locked in with your mechanics. And so hopefully that's something that he can do this offseason. And we come into next season and we'll see where he's at, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Mm-hmm. I like it. Cool. All right. Well, I like that. Good calling in. I like the segment. Hey, if y'all have any questions about those, someone you think we should have mentioned, someone you're surprised we mentioned or something, send those emails into podcast@soxprospects.com. We've only got a few questions this episode. So
or also,
right
can
now.
I just jump in? Or also, if you have other segment ideas you'd like us to try out for the off season, feel free to send them in. Things like that, like exercises,
This is the time to send it in, not like, July when we've got 8 million things on the agenda.
We've got some time during the off season. Yeah.
Take 40 minutes of the next show and do this question. Like, so if they're good questions, it's just not the good time to do it.
Yeah. So if you've got some like fun exercises like that or questions you're interested in, you'd interested in having us discuss, that would make good segments. Feel free. No
guarantees we'll do it, but
just feel free to. We're crowdsourcing here.
Love it.
We're a podcast of the people.
We are. All right. And speaking of the people, we've got a couple of emails in. The first one is from Chris, who asks, label it whatever you want, but is something similar to quote piggybacking at the major league level reasonable? As an example, say you take Chris Sale or pitcher A and Tanner Houck or pitcher B. They share 7 or 8 innings of work every 5 days. Each of those pitchers could theoretically fill in one other time during the week if needed. That helps those two pitchers keeps those two pitchers to around 110 to 130 innings and hopefully healthier and fresh at the end of the year. What is the downside to having one starting spot reserved for those two pitchers? Thanks. I have thoughts, Ian, but I will defer to you first if you have any that immediately come to mind.
I think it's just flexibility. It's hard to have basically 2 guys taking up one starting spot. It just limits what you can do the rest of the week or in the other games with your pitching staff.
I mean, think about how thin they got at times this year. Like the reason you had the Kyle Barraclough game is because they had 2 relievers available.
Yeah, and especially with the way baseball structured it, where you can only carry 13 pitchers max. If you're basically having, because you're in that scenario, Sale is not start. You're not going to put Sale any other day. Sale's just going to start every 5th day or 6th day, whatever you're doing. With Houck too, if he's basically piggybacking, you have them each going, 4 innings, 5 innings. He's not going to be available either too. So it's just really hard to have 2 guys taking up. Basically, your long man is just not available for the other 4 starters. It's really hard for roster construction purposes.
And keep in mind, like, if your 2 guys go 8, then okay, you've rested the bullpen.
Right.
But what if with the 2 guys you only get through 6 and you're burning 3 relievers that night, and then the next night your starter goes 2?
Yeah. Well, and I think
the night before, like
the other thing you've got to remember too is that the minor league rosters are bigger.
That's the reason they do it. They're 28 and 30 players. They do it because they have to get those guys innings. It's not because
it's not like, it's not, it's just, that's the way, when you have a 30-man staff, when you have like a 15, 16, 17-man pitching staff, that's what you have to do.
Well, that's the thing. It's 30, it's, in A-ball, it's 30 players and there's no set. It's not like you can have more than 15 pitchers.
Correct.
So they'll have, like,
didn't Worcester at the end of the year have like 19 pitchers or something?
Well, they had a lot of guys in the bullpen because they only technically had like 2 starting pitchers and 2 players on the bench. Got it. So it was a ton of, and like there were 2 rehabbers and like
I just remember their end of season roster being really weird because all of their position players were in the majors or hurt.
Yeah, they only had 2 bench players at the end.
Right.
But that's AAA. AAA is a little different. In like high A or low A, if you've got 4 or 5 bench players and 9 bench players, say it's 9 and 4, so you've got 13. That means you've got 17 pitchers. So you can make it work. And still sometimes those teams have like games where they go into extra innings and they throw a position player or they're getting
if you get to like the 12th inning, you'll see a position player. But I think roster construction is the main reason. And I think honestly, the other thing is it's hard to sell a guy who's been an established starter on that role. It's hard to tell someone like Tanner Houck that he's going to be piggybacking Chris Sale. Because let's be honest, doing that job, that's not how you're going to get paid. Like in arbitration, especially, they're not going to take kindly to a guy who is going to have like the long
doesn't have
stats.
wins.
Yeah. Well, he actually might have wins, but yeah.
And keep in mind, it's just it has to work. B, they have to accept it, and Yeah, in theory, it keeps them healthier, but it's like you have to have, so you still need 4 other starting pitchers. So you need to have that many pitchers who are good enough to do that with, right? Yeah, okay, that's one spot. Who's your number 5 starter if Tanner Houck's working out of the bullpen? Who's your number 4 starter if you're doing that with another spot? So there's an amount of talent you need to do that is also different.
Well,
Look in the minors, if you've got someone going every 5th day who's getting their head beat in while they're working on something, then it's just the minors. You can't do that in the majors.
it's also too that if you do need, like, let's say someone gets hurt, if Chris Sale is used to only pitching 3 to 4 innings, and then you have Houck has to take a rotation spot of someone else, what do you do then? Like,
Right.
it really limits your
Handcuffs you.
flexibility. Yeah.
Yeah. And look, I think Major League Baseball teams have really, the pendulum has swung back to there being a role for long relievers, right?
100%.
Back in the day, like Goose Gossage wasn't throwing 1 inning at a time. Mike
No.
Marshall wasn't throwing 1 inning at a time, right? It was, you came out for 3 or 4 innings, and that was the one reliever you used if the starter came out after 5, which was early, by the way.
Yeah.
That's, the teams have realized that there is usefulness to Garrett Whitlock throwing multiple innings out of the bullpen, to Josh Winkowski, if he's not in that 8th inning role, throwing multiple innings out of the bullpen. But there's something to be said for having the flexibility of, if the guy is available tonight, he's available tonight. We're not waiting on him to piggyback Sale tomorrow. So
I also think another thing is that we've seen this playoffs is that you got to have true starters. I mean, look at the teams that are left. The Phillies, they have Nola, they have Wheeler. They have horses who can go multiple innings.
Ranger Suarez, I have no problem with Ranger Suarez.
Ranger Suarez, yeah. Astros, same thing.
Yeah,
like they have guys who can. Then you look Arizona. How do they get there? Zach Allen, Merrill Kelly, 2 like legitimate, high end starting pitchers.
And now look Texas, at what happened to
and then Texas, Jordan Montgomery, Nathan Eovaldi, like the team.
Look who just came back for Game 3.
Yeah, Max Scherzer. All 4 teams left. They've all got at least 3 traditional starters who are high end starting pitcher types.
Meanwhile, look at what happened to the Dodgers and the Braves at the end.
Exactly. Look at the teams that
got bounced.
The Rays.
Their pitching fell apart.
Yep.
Yeah.
But the Dodgers, like injuries, Jose Urias being an idiot, things like that. Their pitching staff was shambles. The Braves, they had Spencer Strider. Other than that, I mean, Bryce Elder,
Bryce Elder being your Game 2 starter,
and Max Fried pitching when he clearly was injured was the other one too. I mean, they got hurt. The injuries killed them, but that's the thing is, it's health matters in October, but starting pitching does too. And that's why I think, teams are, you don't want to be going into the season planning for that to be one of your spots, because by the end of the season, that's just not going to work most likely.
Yep. Which is not to say that it was a bad question, to be clear.
No, it's a good question. It's a good question, but
it's just, here's why it doesn't
yeah,
happen.
Exactly. There's a reason teams don't go into the season with that as a plan. Yeah.
Our next question comes from Ethan, who asks, hopefully you get to this before they announce a hire. Do you have any personal favorites for the CBO search? We just talked about that. I thought the next email was the one that talked about that, but thank you, Ethan. And our final email, Ian, is from Ryan, who asks, is player health a tool, a skill, or neither? Are there differences in how you approach this question in building a draft board as opposed to building a major league roster? As an organization, do you feel the Red Sox have been doing a good job of evaluating player health and injury risk? I guess taking the first question first, is player health a tool or skill or neither? I mean, I think that's a semantic question.
Yeah.
Like the tools are the 5 tools. It's that's like just, it's a semantics thing. I think there's a skill to it.
I think there's a skill to it too.
It's not like it's something that's like, I mean, sometimes it's just inherent. Guys get hurt. There are certain guys who get hurt a lot. Yeah. Sometimes you're just not doing your conditioning correctly in the off season.
You're not putting the work in.
Yeah. I mean, there are guys who just get hurt. Like Brian Mata has had a relatively significant injury every year he's been in the system since like 2018.
I think with pitchers though, there are certain things that
arm is different.
Yes, because arm it's like mechanics. There's guys who just inherently have a higher injury risk because they're mechanics. Like I think like a good example is someone like Hunter Dobbins. I mean, he obviously had his surgery in college, and he's had a couple injuries in the with the Red Sox too, right? I believe
I think
Dobbins, he's missed some time,
he had the
but
one, and then he missed the start of this season.
there's a
But
decent amount of
it's
effort in his
not.
delivery.
Yeah.
And it's like when you see it, you're like, okay, I get why there has been some injuries. Mata, same thing. Like Mata's got a good amount of effort. His conditioning has not always been the best. That puts stress on your arm. There are certain deliveries like that you can see. And I think too with position players, you can see like there are just certain guys who are just injury prone.
Mhm.
And the thing I think with injuries that you have to remember, especially with the position players, is there are some with position players that are just like bad luck. Like
Yeah.
if you break your finger because you get
Yeah.
hit, there's nothing you can do.
I was just about to say that.
That to me is not the ones that concern me is when you've got guys who, you keep having the same shoulder injury over and over, or you keep pulling a hamstring or, tearing a hamstring or you keep having lower leg injuries running the bases, things like that. I think are more concerning to me than the guys who have the fluky injuries where it's like they dive for a ground ball and break their wrist or,
Yeah,
they get
that
hit like
just
that. That
happens.
to me, I think that there needs to be, there's not all injuries are created equal, using our favorite line about
Mhm.
walks. When it comes to evaluating a player, I think there are ones that are just like stuff happens. There's nothing you
Mhm.
can do about that. Then there are the ones that are like, okay, this is a red flag that you keep having an injury in the exact same spot, running the bases, pitching, doing whatever.
Yep. Yep. Or it's just like we're bringing you in knowing you have this. So like I think back to the discourse on Nick York,
Yeah.
right? When he was drafted, there was a known issue with his shoulder,
Yeah.
and they were okay with it. And the shoulder hasn't really been too much of. I mean, his arm is limited to second. Like I don't think there's any question of him. There's no question of him working shortstop or anything like that. He's a second baseman now, but like he can turn the pivot.
Yeah.
It's not like he's got a noodle arm. Um, but so there's that aspect of evaluating if a guy has a known issue. But at some point, like once you've got a guy and a guy gets hurt, you've got to help him rehab it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then like
Mhm.
we said, there's a certain amount of inherent risk to pitcher arms. Like that's
Yeah.
just it is
And
what it
the
is.
second part of the question was, what did teams
So
evaluate it or?
there's three parts to it. The next one is, are there differences in how you approach this question in building a draft board as opposed to building a major league roster? No, it's if you're
Oh,
evaluating injury risk, like
well, no, yeah, I think you evaluate injury risk in all situations,
yeah,
but I think in the draft, like you reach a point where you're more willing to assume that risk, if that makes sense. And that
well,
probably applies
because
the same with the major league roster, where it's
it's
like
what you're going to pay for it.
with a dollar figure, you're able to
Yes,
assume that risk.
you're getting
But
a discount.
I
Yeah,
look at a lot of like what a lot of teams have. A way they do is after the 10th round, you take a pitcher. Maybe they just had Tommy John. The Red Sox have been doing that, frankly.
yeah.
Um, a couple that are interesting to me, and was Hayden Mullins was
Hayden
last year, I
Mullins.
believe.
Yep, it was the 2022 draft
Yeah,
that they
12th
drafted him
round
knowing he
pick.
needed Tommy John,
And then
right?
this year they did the same thing
Or had just had it.
with Ryan Amons in the 10th round this year
Well,
from
it's not.
Clemson.
It's he has he had an injury that they knew about. It's not necessarily
Right.
Tommy John,
Well,
right?
no, but I'm just saying he had an
Yeah,
injury. Yes.
yeah.
No, oh yes, he had an injury that they knew about. Um, but with Hayden Mullins, they knew he was going to have Tommy John. And it wasn't Dobbins the same thing. They drafted him with an injury. I want to say now that I'm
Dobbins, I
thinking
think,
about.
had it. I'm looking right now.
But I mean, you look this year too. They took Justin Reimer had torn ACL this year, and they took him.
Yeah. Okay.
But
No. Dobbins injured his UCL in a preseason scrimmage in 2021 and needed. And he had Tommy John in March. He got drafted in June. So
okay, so
they
they knew.
knew.
But I think that in the draft though,
Mullins, I think, was he hadn't had it yet, and they knew he was going to need it.
yeah.
If I've got it
In the
straight.
draft, it can get you a discount. And I think Mullins and Dobbins are two pretty good examples of it. Both of them have come back from Tommy John. Their stuff looks pretty good. Like Mullins was someone scouts who saw him at the end of the season came away pretty impressed. He's a lefty up to 94 with a decent breaking ball. That's something that can kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think with the draft, it can lead you to get some good values, especially later as you reach later on. And it's just weighing, is using our 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th round pick worth, taking the risk that this guy's stuff might not come back or, they have to rehab for 2 seasons.
Yeah,
But
so maybe it is
versus,
different at the major league roster.
I think at the
then.
major league
Yeah.
level, it's a little harder to draft or sign someone knowing that they're going to have surgery. Or, I mean, teams do it. Like teams, the Red Sox did it with James Paxton. They signed him to rehab, and then it obviously paid off this season. But
Mondesi traded for him knowing he was going to be not ready.
That one didn't work out, right?
No, and
so,
sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
But I think that teams are in the MLB side of it. You're less willing to take on the massive risk. Like, obviously, it's why, some teams probably were scared away of Aaron Judge, giving him that mega deal, is that he's had a lot of injuries, things like that. So I think there are little differences there.
And as far as with whether the Red Sox have done a good job or not, I don't think you can tell that unless you're a doctor and you looked at the medicals.
Yeah,
honestly.
I mean, and that's we're not trying to violate.
Because I think what this is probably, I wonder if what the emailer is getting at is like Trevor Story. You knew his arm was bad, like, and he was like, you don't know what the medical said.
No,
you know what I mean? Like, you don't know what. And the other one was Kluber. That's the report that just came out. I wonder if that's the impetus for the emails, that like there were concerns when he signed about his shoulder. And it got, interestingly came out that there were concerns within the organization, I think, right?
Yeah.
Who knows, man? Like, who knows? I'm not a doctor,
No.
I'm just a podcaster, Jim. So
what was the last part of the question too?
That was it. That was the Red Sox. Have the Red Sox done a good job of evaluating player health and injury risk? I don't know.
It's hard to say. Yeah,
it's really hard to say unless you see the medicals and know how to read them and have an opinion.
Well, and I also think too with players, a lot of the time that's not a short-term question. You won't know until, especially when it's like when you're giving out those 10, those long-term contracts, and if you're worried about the injury risk, you're not going to know until the end of the deal how it plays out and whether they did a good job evaluating the risk. And I think that's some of the questions, like, with those deals, the Carlos Correa, the Judge, Mookie Betts, like all the guys who signed those, Xander Bogaerts, those 10, 11-year contracts, 10-year plus contracts, we're not going to know if you've done a good job evaluating until the end of it. Because, maybe they're healthy for the first 5 years, but then maybe the last 5 are just, I think Stanton's a good example of that. The first couple of years he was healthy, performing really well. He's just not been able to stay healthy, and he's not performing as well the rest of the year. So did the Marlins / Yankees evaluate that injury risk correctly? Who knows? Like, maybe not. It's trending that way, maybe probably not. So especially with those longer term, bigger MLB deals, you kind of have to wait and see.
I mean, people forget that his deal was designed for him to opt out.
Yeah.
Like when they signed it, it's like, but he's going to opt out after, what was it, 4 years or something?
5 years, I want to say.
5 years. It was like
5 years.
It was designed that he was going to opt, but then like things went south so quickly, he had to stay in the contract. He couldn't opt out.
And now it's he's got like 3 or 4 more years still, I want to say.
Yeah, my God.
He's under contract until 2028. So
if Fenway Sports Group owned the Yankees, how many GMs or head of baseball ops past Cashman are we on if we're the Yankees?
Probably 2 at least.
2 at least, right? Yeah, I agree. Not to say that it should or should not have gone that way. It's just like,
it is kind of crazy. So he got traded after 2017 when he won the MVP, and he signed this contract in 2015. So it was year 3. So then in the 4th year, he was okay. Then barely played in 19, barely played in 20. Last 3 years, he's played 100 to 130 games or 139 games, have been, okay. He had one really good year. The last 2 years have been pretty bad. Like, it's hard to evaluate those contracts.
So Stanton, he signed a 13-year, $325 million deal plus a 2028 option in November of 2014. He had an opt-out.
Started for the 2015 season,
For the 2015 season. He had an opt-out after the 6th year.
So that's 2020. So that was after 2020.
After 2020.
Which is 2019 and 2020. He played 41 games combined.
Well, granted, 2020 was the 60-game season.
He played 23 games.
Right, but I'm just saying, like, it's 20.
Yes.
Like,
he played a third of that season.
It was a third of the season, so it's the equivalent of if he played
60 games or 50
to
games?
60.
Yeah,
60. Call it. Yeah. So.
Not good.
Yeah.
It's easy to see why he didn't opt out. He made a good choice.
Yeah, of course he did. I mean, he was making, and the values went up, right? Because the first 3 years of that contract were arbitration.
I mean, but you look at the last 2 seasons, like last year, he had an OPS plus of 112. This year, it's down at 87, and it's been trending down every year since 2020.
Yeah, and he's going to make $32 million the next 2 years, $29 million in 2026, $25 million in 2027.
His skills are declining.
And he's going to be bought out for $10 million in 2028.
Yeah. So that's why it's hard to. And the point is, though, after the first 3 years, you probably looked at that contract and you were like, "Oh wow!" Like,
that's what I was saying. He was going to opt out after 2020.
Yeah, because he went from 22. So he signed it after 2014, 2015, right? like that offseason?
Yeah, he signed it in November of 14.
So 159 OPS plus in 2015, 120 in 2016, 169 in 2017. Then he got traded.
He was a monster.
Yeah. Here's an interesting one. Do you think he gets to 500 home runs? He's at 402.
Is he at 400?
Yeah.
How old is he?
33. About to turn 34.
Turns 34 at Yankee Stadium.
Turns 34 in November. So he needs 100 home runs in the next 4 years, basically, right? Or how long is that contract? 4 years?
The contract goes through 2027.
So it's 4 years.
So that's
2024, 2025, 26.
4 years. 4 years. Sorry.
4 years. Yeah. It's going to be close. I mean, he had 24 this year, but he only played 100 games. So it's going to come down to health, ironically. But
yeah, if he stays on the field, he'll probably get there.
I was just surprised that he was at 400 already. That seemed high. But then I remembered how good he was for that first, stretch with Miami. Those first 7 years were incredible. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I think, Ian, maybe it's time to wrap it up. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to the Ludlow Thieves for our intro and outro music. Thank you for those who follow us on X, call it Twitter, whatever. You can follow the website at Sox Prospects. That works for Instagram as well. You can follow me at SP Chris Hatfield, and you can follow Ian at Ian Cundall. That's IANCUNDALL. We want to thank everyone who supports us on patreon.com/Sox Prospects. In this episode, we're going to shout out all of our $5 level Patreon supporters because Patreon updated and changed the way it orders all the $5 level contributors. So it's impossible for me to tell who got added to that tier in what order. So we're going to do everyone this episode. And then next episode, we're going to go back to the 10 per episode. So our $5 level Patreon supporters are Deb Kendall, Lendl Martin, Gerardo Ian Tosca, Ernest Shermer, Kyle C., Tyler Woodrow, Jeff Trainer, Tim Harding, James O'Hara, Nathan Kenyon, David B., Al Mendel, Kevin Katrides, Steve Gregory, James Bailey, Andreas Goldstrand, Forrest Perkins, Mark Herman, Brian Cowan, Andrew K., Jeff Harwood, Jimmy Mountain, Dusty G., Michael Murphy, Pavel, Jordan Shabbat, Nicholas Staropoli, Mike Coano, Chris Bollier, Curtis Waltman, Michael Stewart, Caleb Farron, John Kane, Jason Stoneburner, Grayson Sinner, Stephen G. Shaw, Jason Parker, Mike Granger, Jeff Richardson, Dan Gillen, Nicholas Lenson, Paul Manish, James P. McMahon, Jim Tuttle, Steve Patch, Brian Rose, Jake O'Donnell, Sean Guinan, Alex M. Rivers, John Hersey, Chance Stevenson, Ben Wadman, Andrew Del Rosso, Brendan Kaizen, Mark DeMellon, Alfred Mamlet, James O'Sullivan, Shane Regan, Dakota Randall, who I figured out who you were. I'm an idiot. Thank you for your support. Jeff Smith and Carl Mayer. Thank you all for your support. Thank you to everyone who wants to support us on patreon.com. Thank you to the people who are not at the $5 level tier. We appreciate your support as well. That's going to be it for us. We'll be back in your eardrums soon. The off-season podcasts are obviously less regular because there's less to talk about, but it won't be too long. Next episode, probably a couple weeks, maybe 2 or 3. We'll see. We'll see what happens. If stuff happens, we'll come back sooner. If stuff doesn't happen, it may be a little longer. But we'll be back in your eardrums soon. Thank you all for listening.